Welcome to another episode of Activista Rise Up. I am your host, Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. You can follow this conversation on all my social media channels or by visiting Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcast. Farmworker justice is an issue that we all should put more attention to. Farm workers work every day to make sure that there's food on the tables of our families, that American kitchens and America's homes have the right nutrition and access to the freshest vegetables and produce. Most of the time, we don't pause to think about what are the conditions of those workers who are picking up the fruits during the summer. Do they live in my town? Where do they come from? Where do they house? So simple questions like that we ought to figure out as a community how we can address. We all know the story of the farm worker movement in the United States, led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And we were able to hear last week from Dolores Huerta, who spoke about the importance of protecting and defending the rights of farm workers. I'm going to show you a little video that gives a little bit of the history of the farm workers movement. And then we are going to talk about what it takes today to do what Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta tried to do 50, 60 years ago, to improve the working conditions of farm workers across the Eastern region, but also nationally. At the end of the day, we live in a society that is interconnected, and what happens in California or Florida is as important as what happens in New York and New Jersey in our farms and in the lives of our farm workers. Let's watch this video for a little while. As you can see from the discussion, we have a rich history of organizing farm workers in the United States. Most of the time, those jobs are low pay, are highly exploitative, and the workforce is mostly made up of immigrant workers. Today, a big shift is happening. A lot of women are also working on the fields, and many of them have joined the movement to end sexual harassment and domestic violence on the fields. We will learn today how we as consumers and as activists for social justice, we can engage in efforts on our backyard in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or all across the United States, how we can come together to improve the lives and the rights of farm workers in the United States. To help me have this conversation, I have two special guests who are actively organizing farm workers in New York and the New Jersey region. My first guest is Juanita Sarmiento. She is the Catskill Regional Coordinator for the Rural and Migrant Ministry of New York State. She focuses on youth empowerment and on educating the community and workers about their rights. She was born in Colombia and was raised in upstate New York since she was 5 years old. Joining her will be Jessica Culley. She is the General Coordinator for CATA, the Comité de Apoyo al Trabajador Agricolas, Farmworker Organizing Committee. She has been at CATA since 2002. She is responsible for coordinating CATA throughout New Jersey, Southern Pennsylvania, and the Delmarva Peninsula. Jessica is originally from Cumberland, Pennsylvania, but has lived in the Pennsylvania area for 20 years. She studied environmental science in Pennsylvania, lived and worked in Honduras, and her favorite farm produce is a slice of watermelon in July. I love watermelon in July as well. So let's welcome Juanita and Jessica to Activista Rise Up. I love that. I do love watermelon.
It's always my favorite question, just to ask What's your favorite summer farm produce?
Yes. What is yours, Juanita? Let's start right there because it just is,
Oh man,
I really love that. Yeah.
I love watermelon too, but I would have to also go with a more savory treat like corn, elote, right?
Los elotes, sí.
Corn on the barbecue.
Yes. It's just the most exciting part about the summer, right? Or going into the summer is all these fresh products that you can just pick up at a farm, especially in upstate New York and in southern New Jersey. So it's good to make those connections about how happy those things makes us, right? So building up from how happy fresh products and fruits and fresh food makes us to the people who do the work to give us those amazing fruits. I want to thank you for joining me to have this conversation. I spend a lot of time in this show talking about immigrant justice and how immigrants are the essential workers during this pandemic. And I thought it was just appropriate to focus one of my shows on the farm workers and the Farmworker Justice movement, just because they're so integral to our own safety, and how little we think about them in our daily lives. So I want to thank you for coming to join us. Can you tell me a little bit about your organizations? Where are you located and what are you doing, so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better? So why don't we start with you, Jessica?
Sure. I work with CATA, el Comité de Apoyo a Los Trabajadores Agricolas, or the Farmworkers Support Committee. And we're a membership organization of migrant and immigrant farm workers and low-wage immigrant workers. We are active in the southern part of New Jersey, so south of Trenton. So people who think that Trenton is in South Jersey, it really isn't. You need to drive another 2 hours further south and actually find why New Jersey is called the Garden State. We also do work in southeastern Pennsylvania with a lot of folks working in the mushroom industry, which is a whole other beast. And then down in the Delmarva Peninsula, where a lot of our members, other than farm workers, we also have a lot of folks working in the poultry industry. So I said we're a membership-based organization. Our members decide the kind of work that we're going to do, the campaigns we're going to be working on, and most of our work is organized in sort of 3 general areas around immigrant justice, worker justice, and food justice.
Yeah, thank you. We'll get to talk a little bit about those 3 areas of work now in a little while. Juanita, can you tell me a little bit about your organization?
Yeah. So Rural and Migrant Ministry is a New York statewide organization. We have centers up in Lyons, New York, which is all the way in the Northwest. We have a center here in Sullivan County, New York, where I am right now, one in Cornwall, New York, right along the Hudson River, and then one in Long Island. All of our centers work for similar to CATA, migrant rights, food rights, and immigrant rights. We've been around for about 40 years, and the most important part of our work is providing the educational resources to rural and migrant communities throughout New York State to become leaders within the community. And amazingly so, even during the pandemic, we've established I believe 4 or 5 beautiful cooperatives. Some existed before the pandemic started. One just launched on Long Island, and on their first day of their launch, they were able to sell hundreds of flowers. So that was so exciting. That was something that happened this weekend.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you tell me how large is the workforce of farm workers in New York State and also in New Jersey or in the region that you cover, Jessica?
I'll let Juana go first and talk about
work. Yeah. No, why don't let me re-ask this question? So, So one of the things that we don't realize is how large the population of farm workers are, both in New York and New Jersey. So, Juanita, tell me a little bit about the population of farm workers in New York State, where they're at, how many are there? What's the makeup of them? Because most people think that they're mostly undocumented migrant workers or S2B workers.
Yeah.
Is there a breakdown? And is there, who are they? And the same question for you, Jessica, for the areas that you cover.
So there are hundreds of farms in the areas that we cover. I don't have an exact count on it just because of how many there are. Even locally to me, I work with food chain workers mainly, which includes like factory and processing plants, migrant workers and rural workers that, they're the ones that break down the meat for us. They're the ones that prepare the food, from food to chips or something like that. I think
so it's not just workers on the fields. You're actually also representing workers in the process, in the line of work, in the production chain. Yeah.
Yes. And if I were to guess the amount of factories and farms that are right here in just this town that I'm in, I would say at least 10 to 15.
Oh, yeah. This upstate New York is a large farmland and a lot of production of the food supply.
Mm-hmm.
Are the workers mostly H2B, or are they just immigrants or natives?
It's a mix. I believe the majority of the workers that we work with are migrant workers, immigrant workers. Those that work on the farms are, a lot of them are H2B, and they come from Central America, South America, and the Caribbean islands like Jamaica and some other islands in the Caribbean.
So you do, it's not just Latinos, you do have some Afro-Caribbean members in the community. What about you, Jessica, in terms of the region you represent?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of farm workers, different people use different numbers to like estimate the size of the population, and I think those different numbers are indicative of the fact that we don't have good data, right? There's a lot of folks work in really invisible places. They don't interact a lot with their local communities. But we say that anywhere around 20,000 farm workers throughout the state of New Jersey. About 2,000 of them are coming, 2,000 to 3,000 on the H-2A program. So with a guest worker visa, and we can talk more about what that means and whatnot. A large portion of the population is still migratory, so they're working in the winter times down south on farms in Florida, and then coming up here for the season. We have a big production of blueberries in Atlantic County, which is near Atlantic City.
Yeah,
and that's like, we get probably somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 workers who come in for a very short period of time, for about a month and a half, in the months of June and July, and they're coming from further south. They maybe were in Florida, coming up to Georgia, North Carolina, and then coming to New Jersey, and then after here they're going to Michigan or Maine. And then we have like a large percentage of folks who also live in our local communities. So, South Jersey has a really big nursery industry. So ornamental plants and trees, and that is almost year-round work, and tends to be slightly better paid. And so we have a lot of folks who have stayed in the area, built families, and so it's all over the place.
So for what's important to me is this in acknowledgement that the farm worker population is not just migrant or H2B, it's actually a native population as well. So when we talk about Farmworker Justice, it's about our communities that are here and not moving, are not mobile. I want, during the pandemic, we were all in place, right? With being in this environment for a whole year. And I remember early on in last year in March, around this time, there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen to farm workers in the farms, or what kind of processes that we're going to have to stay safe during the height of the pandemic. How did your prospective organizations address that crisis? And do you think that farms are better prepared a year later to deal with some of the concerns about in the health of the workers, but also protecting them so that we can able to keep them safe and keep the food supply safe? So are we better off a year later in the farm industry and with the farm worker safety? Juanita? So
for New York State, and I'm going to be honest with you here, I'm not going to try and sugarcoat things. If it wasn't for grassroots efforts, unions and organizations like ours, like CATA and RMM, I feel like a lot would have been left in the dust. A lot of our people would have been hurt. We had to do a lot of groundwork and action work, which RMM normally does not do. We do more educational work and activism work and organization. But during the pandemic, we had to be on the ground, going to each and every one of the farms and the factories, bringing masks and sanitation products and other types of PPE to the workers, because unfortunately they weren't being taken care of by their employers. And now with the vaccine rollout, I think that a huge issue that we're having is with the education of the vaccination safety, and the translation of the materials into Spanish, and also the access, right? The broadband access, the information access. These are huge issues that are happening because I believe right now we have a surplus of vaccines here in New York State. We're like at the level of when people want to get vaccinated. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think the biggest part about it is around education. We need to go to the communities and educate them.
Unlike New Jersey, New York did establish a pandemic relief fund for all workers. Do farm workers qualify? Okay.
So it's for undocumented funding, right? So farm workers and factory workers that have a residency, a visa, or a legal residency or citizenship, they got the stipend. It's for the people that don't have a legal residency or an
ITIN.
Yeah.
The ITIN number, yeah.
So they're the ones that are going to get the funding. And, that's still rolling out. There's still some questions about it. So we'll see some answers soon.
Yeah. Jessica, how did we do in New Jersey with farm worker safety?
In a state like New Jersey, I feel like it's so interesting. I think New Jersey was on the forefront of providing labor protections in the past. And I think honestly, we're pretty far behind right now, right? So there's been a lot of things that we've been fighting in coalition for with organizations around the state, like Juanita said, with unions and worker centers and so many different organizations that have been trying to fight for more support for the community in general.
Yeah.
So we've been fighting for a pandemic relief assistance fund for the undocumented community that would include farm workers. We've been fighting for extending sick days, because even though technically a lot of the farms should have been covered under the federal provision of paid sick time for folks dealing with COVID, a lot of them didn't. They didn't have information about it. That the farmers didn't actually share information. So yeah, we started last year before the season started, we started trying to communicate with our state agencies, right? The State Department of Labor, the State Department of Health, around like our concerns that like workers were going to get left behind, like that they were going to come into these crowded housing conditions, they were going to come into sharing transportation, and that they weren't going to have the proper PPE, I'll get it out. And you know, they shared those concerns very seriously, but it took them a really long time to develop any sort of guidance for employers. And when they did develop guidance, it wasn't made mandatory. It was like recommended. Yes. And so that whole time we started going out like a year ago, pretty much a year ago, like going out. We were one of the first organizations to start doing in-person outreach, because we were like, people need information about like what in the heck is going on, and like what they can do, where they can get tested, all this kind of stuff. And providing PPE, connecting people with health services, working with our migrant clinics. And yeah, like a year later, it feels maybe a little better, right? Like I feel like that the vaccine rollout is I think that the issue that you bring up, Juanita, about like sort of like education around the vaccine, and the fact that maybe now we've pretty much gotten to the members of the community who wanted to be vaccinated to begin with, and now it's like it's the tough nuts to crack, right? Like the folks that have to be a bit more convinced. I think that's true. I do think that the rollout has gone relatively smoothly, though. You know, there are clinics are going out to the farms and providing on-site services for the employers who will engage with that process. And we've had a good portion of our folks get vaccinated, but it's the folks who have voluntarily done it. And so now it's the work of like really working to educate the rest of the community on like what the importance is, and why is it perhaps a risk people should be willing to take.
I think there is a difference between when the willingness to do the work of signing up and showing up, and then the readiness of the vaccine, so that people who might not have the time to go look and for an appointment, they see it and they get it. So I think that those targeted approaches to like sending the vaccine to the farms, I think that's what's gonna perhaps increase the access to communities who don't have the time to spend days and days making that doesn't happen right now, but it was happening at the beginning, right?
Yes,
like
for sure.
You would spend hours and hours trying to get an appointment. So do you feel that there's enough access to the vaccine, that there will be a little bit more safety in this time around in the COVID? Yeah.
I mean, I think that it is super important that we be like focused on the vaccine rollout, but not neglecting the fact that there still needs to be safety measures taken in the workplaces, right? So like whether it's on a farm or whether it's in a packing house, all of the safety measures that were recommended last year should still be being followed.
And who's doing that?
People still should have PPE. There should still be social distancing, all of those kinds of things. And I think that a little bit that is starting to like fall off of people's radars. I mean, it fell off of employers' radars months ago, to be honest. Last fall, they were tired of giving people hand sanitizer and giving people masks and like asking people to wear the masks. And so I think there's like this desire to focus on the vaccines, like the thing that's going to save us all. But we still need to be talking with people about what are the mitigation measures we need to be taking. Where can they get tested if they have symptoms? Because people are still going into the hospital. People are still getting sick. People are still being attached to ventilators. So like, how do we?
So that is like, the idea that vaccine is great, but you still need to have the process of education of the workers or what prevention processes are. And then you have to sort of have a process of holding the employers accountable for providing those measures. So how are you, Juanita, doing that work in New York State? And then how are you doing that work, Jessica, with CATA?
So it's a little difficult because, like Jessica said, employers are not as supportive of the safety precautions needed to prevent COVID from spreading again. But we have had a lot of support from New York State and from the public health systems. While I wish there was more of a disciplinary action taken by public health with organizations that aren't following these guidelines, that's not happening. And I don't think it's going to happen because of the way that businesses are the ones that make the decisions. But I think we still need to,
you have a friend joining you right now. Yes.
I love it.
Yeah. What is his name? Look at that. Such a cute.
Rosie. Say hi, Rosie.
Hi, Rosie.
Rosie. It's a beautiful dog joining Juanita. So New York State got the right to organize for farm workers over a year ago. Has that improved the ability of unions to engage and help support more of the enforcement side of safety for farm workers?
So at RMM, we actually have a really great partnership with a few different unions like RWDSU and the UFCW. And I know there's a couple other ones I can't remember off the top of my head. But recently, one of our local unions here were able to unionize one of the food processing plants, which is amazing to see in a town like this, in a very red county. And I think that there's definitely a lot of work to do moving forward, but we are seeing changes and we are seeing support for the workers. And if we can get people, even if they don't join the union, to at least talk with the unions and learn more about their rights, talk with RMM and learn about what protections are available to them through New York State, we're definitely seeing some changes, and it's really exciting to see. This is a fight that's been happening for over 400 years, since the beginning of the United States and slavery and the Jim Crow laws, and we're finally breaking down those barriers. A little late, but it's happening.
Yeah. We don't have the right of farm workers to organize in New Jersey or down south where you are, Jessica, but how are you working to improve those conditions? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what those conditions are like for workers. Yeah.
I mean, it's probably important to say that the Constitution of New Jersey does support the right of farm workers to organize. It's just not, we don't have a piece of legislation. So there's not a specific process or like a department to oversee. And so it can be hard to like make it happen. But workers in New Jersey have organized and did organize into unions back in the 1980s. And it's some of CATA's really interesting history that I wish we had more stories about, because it was part of the past that CATA organizers went out and salted on farms anyways, so stuff that we need to work more on, like figuring out how to talk
to elevate. Yes, because I mean, this is something new and learning that there was actually organizing going on in New Jersey for farm workers. So thank you for elevating that. Yeah.
But I think, working in coalition with organizations, it's easy to separate farm workers out, and there are special circumstances about farm workers in the workplace, and the fact that some people live in farm provided housing and things like that do make them sort of a special group. But a lot of times the work conditions are really very similar to what a lot of low-wage immigrant workers are facing in packing houses and factories and landscaping jobs. And so like the struggles to organize are really shared ones with like the larger immigrant community, I think. And we've worked really hard with the Protect New Jersey Workers Coalition, which I know that you know about, to get at least an executive order in the state of New Jersey that provides or requires employers to provide certain protections to their workers. So that we finally got that at the end of October last year, right? So because most of 2020 to get mandated protections for workers in their workplaces, which include farm workers, which is the Executive Order 192. And it also created a way to submit complaints. And it was crazy because I think, so obviously these weren't farm workplaces. We're going to sort of see how we can use that system this year, this season. But in the first month, I think, month to 6 weeks that they had, the New Jersey Department of Labor had the complaint system up, they received, I think, 700 complaints or something super crazy, which, to be fair, there are frustrations in like how all of those complaints are being received, how they're being processed, how they're being investigated. But there is like an actual mechanism for workers to like report things and to get some sort of response, which we think is really important as a tool, right? Like not workers to just like sort of report something and like forget about it and then and think that the state government is going to fix it for them, because we know that that's never the way it works, right? But how can they use the tool in order to work with their employers and negotiate with their employers things, changes that they want to see in their workplaces? And so we've had a couple of groups who have gone through that process. Some of them have been more successful than others, and in the past, we've used other mechanisms, right? Whether it's OSHA or wage complaints with the Department of Labor to assist groups of workers in organizing on a more short-term scale, right? Like we haven't done union organizing in New Jersey for a long time, but groups of workers have come together for short periods of time to address workplace conditions, and we anticipate continuing to do that.
What are some of those violations that you both see for the farm workers, both in New York, in the whole region? So, Juanita?
I think one of the biggest things that we fought for, and it's still part of the fight, is overtime pay and sick time, vacation time, being like, our workers work sometimes 80 hours a week. They deserve to be able to have the time off to rest, a day of rest, 2 days of rest, and that wasn't the case before. Now it sort of is, but we don't know who's following the legislation. And
so that's the case of the need for enforcement, right? Like ability for workers to complain if something is not happening.
Yes.
What is you both talked about that the H2B program is not as big as some people think it is in this area. But what are some of the differences between, let's say, a worker who is an H2B, that's a visa for farm workers, and just a migrant worker? I mean, are the conditions the same? Is there a different treatment, a different pay? Like what is the difference between those two populations?
I can start, and then if you want to throw more information in, I'm happy. If I'm wrong about something, the program is still relatively small in New Jersey, but I say this with a big caveat. It has grown really exponentially over the last 5 years. So I believe this year there are over 100 pending job orders and sort of solicitation applications to the H2A program by farm employers in the state, which is, I think it's like 3 times as many as like 5 or 6 years ago. So and some for much bigger numbers of people than in the past. So even though it's still a relatively small program, I would say it's becoming a bigger player.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, there are on paper, things for H2A workers should be a lot like a decent, like pretty not too bad. I think this year the wage for an H2A worker, which is called the adverse effect wage rate in New Jersey, is $14.05.
Okay.
And our minimum wage for farm workers this year is generally under state law is $10.44 an hour. So like wages should be like significantly higher for H2A workers. They employers have to provide housing, access to either food, like ability to buy food to prepare, or like meals to be provided at like, essentially they say at cost.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, what does it look like on paper versus like, what is it like in reality, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of, I think for years, we've had a lot of workers whose hours would get underreported so that they weren't actually being paid the adverse effect wage rate.
Mm-hmm.
Had workers who felt like they were working at sort of really abusive supervisors, which is, I think, pretty normal in ag, but with the added caveat that like you can't leave your place of employment and go look for a job elsewhere, because if you do, you lose your status, right? You lose your visa. So like, you know, it sort of like creates a situation where workers feel trapped in situations that are abusive.
Yeah. And that's the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems of there to be a visa problem is that you're tied to your employer. So and if you leave that job, you lose your visa. So you have to go back. So that creates a power dynamics. Would you consider, I mean, that's wage theft, you know, when you don't, you know, you underreport the hours worked so that you don't end up paying more to H-2B visas. How are the conditions in New York for H-2B visas, Juanita?
I would say it's pretty similar as New Jersey. I believe most of our H-2A visa holders are towards the borders of New York State, Long Island, and upstate. But I do know that we do have local farms that also have visa holders as well. I do know that they do get paid more than the minimum wage, but I would find that probably the same issues that Jessica mentioned, we'd probably see here as well. I don't have as much information as on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is
one of the things that surprised me when I read is that traditionally most people think that farm worker is a man, but there is an increased number of women who are farm workers and go, you know, and are migrant farm workers. And so the whole issue of sexual harassment, domestic violence, and issues of health regarding to women is a big deal. So how do you address the issues that impact that population of women who are, you know, who we traditionally don't think are in this industry?
So we actually had a playwright, Lisa Ramirez, write the play called To the Bone, exemplifying and like really bringing light to this specific issue of women in the food industry, in the food processing industry, and what they go through. And, you know, with her help, with the help of the theater, they were able to raise over $10,000 to support Rural and Migrant Ministry's efforts to support these people. But, you know, anytime sexual harassment, whether it's with the migrant populations, with the farm worker populations, or with just the general population of the United States, you know, it's not an easy conversation to have, and it's also not easy to provide proof of it, especially when you have these abusive supervisors. You know, when you have also contract organizers. So we have people getting employed through contracts as like not by the actual farms and factories, but by somebody else, you can't fight against the employer because you're not employed by them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that comes up with this. I don't know if Jessica has more knowledge on how you fought it or helped.
I mean, it's been interesting. As an organization in general, in the past, we've had mostly male leadership, right? Mostly men participating and in leadership in the organization. And it's, even though this change is happening, we see it not so much in the migrant population. The migrant population tends to still be mostly groups of men who are traveling together, but definitely in like folks living and working in Southern New Jersey in the nursery industry, in the packing houses, a lot of women. And it's really the pandemic, man, like moving to like holding meetings virtually. Yeah. And women being able to participate in meetings from home has been like really like sort of transformative in some ways in creating space for female like women to participate in a really more active way in the organization. And that we're getting more and more connected to these stories and these histories of like what's happening to people in different places. It's really hard though, because people are, we talk about it a lot, right? Like, why don't H2A workers report wage theft? Well, because they want to come back next year, right? Yeah. Why doesn't so-and-so report like the abuse from their supervisor? Well, because they're trying to keep their job. They don't want that. People are worried about losing income, not being able to find work. And that's like a big barrier, that those low wages and sort of living paycheck to paycheck is like a real big barrier for a lot of people, a lot of farm workers and low wage immigrant workers to report things and speak up, because they say, well, who's going to pay my rent if I lose my job, right? And I think that happens for women too. That feeling of like being dependent on that income in order to pay the bills.
So and that is a real issue, because sexual harassment, just like it's a matter of power, right? And who has the power has control and intimidates. So in those circumstances, and that's real for women and it's real for men that want to come back, because that's sort of what their living is. How do you build power? Like, what is your formula for building power for farm workers in the industry? Because there is a power dynamic, and if they're migrants, they go from place to place, and there's this disconnect between local communities and them sometimes. So what is your strategy for building worker power?
So here at RMM, we actually have a group, or more of an event, but it's also a group called the Rural Women's Assembly. And we host a statewide event every single year where these women share their stories. We also have, speakers that have overcome the same struggles and battles that these women are currently going through. They share their stories of overcoming. And this is really empowering. And we've noticed it because every year we get hundreds, tens of women that are signing up to be part of this assembly, and a lot of supporters that finance it so that these women can participate. We also have rural women programs in, I believe, almost all of our centers. Here in my center in Sullivan County, in the Catskills, we have a cooperative that just happens to be all women at the moment. But these are the same women that came from these families, these houses, were the rural worker families. And the most important thing is being able to create leaders out of them.
Yeah, I think it's a dual process of like what's the internal work, and every single one of the members of our community have made incredibly powerful decisions in their lives, right? Like they've They've crossed borders looking for a better life. Some of them have left families behind, created families. So many different moments in their life where they've already made these like really difficult decisions. And sometimes it's like contextualizing that for people, because I think that they don't look at it and see, oh wow, like I did all of that, like
Yes.
I can do this other thing, right?
The
Like
courage that took, right? Yeah.
yeah, there's just so there. I think there's that work. It was last week actually. We were sitting with a group of workers who made an OSHA complaint at a warehouse they were working in, and all got fired, and are in the process of a legal process right now. But we were sitting and we were having like a potluck at our community garden in Bridgeton, and we were this was a mixed group, men and women, and they were talking about how frustrated they were about their coworkers who didn't speak up with them, right? And I asked them, I said, well, what was it in you? Like, what was the thing in you that said, now is the time to say something? Like, now is I'm going to step forward, even though I also have things to be worried about, right? About bills and who, all that stuff. I was like, what was it that pushed you forward? And like, how do we help other people connect with that, right? Like, how does your story help someone else connect with their own power that they have?
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you were saying, Juanita.
Yes.
Like, women share their stories at this assembly. But then there's an external piece. Like we've also started doing some fundraising. How do we help? Like, if people do get fired, like there's just like real life consequences, right?
Yeah.
So like, what is also the support that the allied community can provide to workers who find themselves in a difficult situation, right? Like,
and what is that? What can allies do? Yeah.
We started a COVID relief fund last year, which was like the first time we had ever really done fundraising for like providing financial assistance. I think, Juanita, like you were saying, we were like an educational organization, and we were like, well, nobody else is raising money for our community, so we're going to have to raise money for our community.
Yes.
And so the COVID relief fund was the first time, and we've actually are talking about how do we transition that into a worker assistance fund for the future, because it's just far too common that people do finally find it in themselves. Like, they get pissed off enough, motivated enough to stand up for themselves, and then the bosses do retaliate. Like, this is reality, and you can connect them to an attorney, but those processes take time.
Yeah.
And so, like,
we will put the information on the website and at the end of the show on the COVID Relief Fund for CATA. I also know, and if you have a relief fund, Juanita, also please let us know. We will put the website on at the end of the show as well. I also see in building external power, I also see that you both are engaged at some level in the whole movement for food justice. Can maybe one of you talk a little bit about what that means and how that relates to building external power in the communities for farm workers? Yeah.
Do you want to talk, Juanita? I'm happy to say what we do, but maybe you want to go first.
Go ahead.
Okay. We years ago, I don't even remember how long ago, CATA used to have an office in Puerto Rico, right? One of the things I didn't say is we still have like a migrant population of workers from Puerto Rico who come up every year. And so we had an office in Puerto Rico, and one of the projects that happened with the families of farm workers was starting huertos caseros, right? Like gardens. And they identified for them that one of their things that was really important to them was to grow food without using pesticides. And that continues to be something, I think, growing out of like the pesticide education that we've done with the farm worker community, like having access to fruits and vegetables that is not produced with chemicals, which is the conventional way of doing ag. People said, well, we don't have a whole lot of say in what does or does not happen in our workplace, but that doesn't mean we don't want to nourish ourselves with something that is healthy for us. So we started community gardens a number of years ago. We have our biggest one is in southern New Jersey. And it's been like a really kind of amazing space for people to practice the ag that they knew at campesinos in Mexico and in Guatemala, or from their grandparents, places for them to teach their children about how to grow food, how to like grow things that are hard to find in the supermarket. So like cultural foods that are that people want to get into. So I think last year we had like 16 varieties of chiles in the garden. And that was really important. And it's also like a space where we are able to do a lot of political education around the food system at large.
And I give them a sense of pride, right, on what their skills are and what they can, the cultural pride. What about you, Juanita?
I think the biggest part is being able to access this food, right? These workers are working, producing it for us, preparing it, making sure that it's on our tables, but what is the access that they get to it? Are their wages enough so that they can buy that food that they're producing, right? If it's organic, free, antibiotic free, you know, this usually runs at a higher price, and a lot of it has to do with the same people that are making it to be able to afford it.
Yeah. So how, you know, to me, thinking about the folks who grow our food and like you said, work to make sure that we have food on the table, so how do we make sure that they have food also when they're here, like they have access to nutritious meals? And I think that's like the juxtaposition of, like, we don't think about that, but we also as activists and as social justice leaders have to be conscious about how do I support those organizations that are doing that work so critical. So before we finish, how did you get connected to the Farmworker Justice movement? Like, what is the why for you doing this work? Jessica.
I sometimes wonder how 20 years later, how is it that I came to be here in this organization and have spent the last 20 years of my life here? It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I think the story that I think of most is I studied environmental science. And when I was in college, I spent one semester in Costa Rica. So this was, shall I date myself? I was in Costa Rica when Clinton was president.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And while I was in Costa Rica that semester, Clinton made a visit to Costa Rica. And there was a huge march in San Jose, the capital, by workers from the Dole banana plantations who had become sterilized from the incredible overuse of pesticides on the banana plantations. And before that happened, I don't know that I ever thought about farm workers, to be honest. But that was a moment where I saw something about how like agriculture is practiced in the US, but also how it's exported and how like it contributes to my immigration and so many different things. I mean, most Costa Ricans were not coming to the US, but there was a huge immigration into Nicaragua. Anyways, it was just like, there were so many different things that.
But you identified that moment as the one that made you question.
Yes, it was also my first march, my first protest march ever.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you got the spark. You're still doing this work today. Juanita?
Thank you, Jessica, for joining the movement. Even though you started 20 years ago, thank you anyways. So for me, the agricultural life has been a part of my identity ever since I was born. I was born in Colombia. My family had farms throughout all of their history, but my passion was always animal justice and veterinary sciences and biology. I actually went to school for biology and animal sciences, but I had to come home for an emergency. And while I was here working with different veterinarians, I started volunteering for RMM, and that's how I stayed. You know, I was working with the youth in the youth empowerment programs that we have. And ever since then, I've been here. It's about to be 4 years. But like I said, it's part of my identity. It's who I am. I've worked on farms growing up, taking care of horses and livestock and all of those different things. My passion is still always going to be animals, but you know, we can't have that. We can't have these farms without the people.
And that is such a powerful statement. We cannot have farms without people. We cannot have food without people. And part of doing food justice or farm worker justice is just thinking about the core, about what are the conditions for those who pick our fruits and our vegetables and make sure that we have access to meals. How can people support CATA and stay connected with you? And the same with you, Juanita. How can they support the rural ministry and stay connected to the work that you do?
You can sign up for our newsletter. That's one way. We send out an e-newsletter every month. We're always working on different advocacy campaigns. In New Jersey, there's still a campaign going to increase the number of earned sick days. There's a campaign around income support for undocumented communities. If there's anybody listening from Pennsylvania, there's a big movement to win driver's licenses. So following following New York and then New Jersey, next is Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Immigrants need access to driver's licenses. But we can share all kinds of information on how to assist with those struggles if you get in touch.
Awesome. And we will put the information on your website at the end of the show. Yeah.
For RMM, at Rural and Migrant Ministry, we have our website as well where you can sign up for our newsletter. Also, we have multiple events happening this year because it is our 40th anniversary of existing, which is really exciting. And it's also our executive director's 30th anniversary. I can't wait for people to see his pictures from when he started. We have a Justice Walk coming up July 17th and 18th, and then our 40th anniversary gala is going to be October 9th and 10th. So if you do sign up to our newsletter, right off of our website, you can get all the information about this. We're always looking for volunteers. We're always, nonstop fundraising. Just like CATA, we need lawyers, we need support, we need funding for our programs, our vehicles, and making sure that we have people on the ground to help everyone out. So if you can't donate yourself, the more that you learn about these organizations, the more we're able to raise funds, and hopefully, organizations that are much bigger than us will see us and give us grants so that we can continue supporting these people, continue growing the cooperatives that we have, and providing better youth empowerment programs for the young people of rural America.
Thank you so much for this essential work that you do, elevating the voices and empowering farm workers, and making sure that as community members understand the reality of their lives and raising the consciousness so that we can do something about it. I thank you for your service and your activism to raise our consciousness around food justice and about farm worker justice. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Patricia, for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We'll be in touch. Thank you. The struggle for immigrant justice, for farm worker justice, is connected at the core about how we build community across all those essential parts of who make sure that we are. Let me start here again. We can cut this off, Laura. The struggle for farm worker justice goes beyond just improving the working conditions that they're under. It's connected to our ability as community members to understand the role that we play in improving the food justice system, demanding more responsibility in how we grow our crops, and at the core, demanding that those who feed us, those who grow our products and grow our food and are all along the food supply chain have dignity in their lives and have access to the food that nourish them so that they can help nourish us. I am so excited to have been able to have this discussion both with Juanita and Jessica, and I ask you to join us and join them in their struggle to defend farm workers and improve their lives every day. We are going into the second year of the pandemic. These workers need your support, whether through the COVID relief or their support of their rights and their legal funds. Please contribute, please volunteer, and please elevate the fight for justice in our farms here in the United States, and call out abuses that happen with mega corporations that are driving farm policy abroad and sometimes causing migration of farm workers into the United States. We are all in this together. It's not just around the pandemic, but it's also about everyday lives. I thank you for your activism and encourage you to continue doing more so that we can actually have an impact in the lives of workers, immigrant workers, and farm workers. Sí se puede.